Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Pride and Prejudice. Chapter 10, Off to London. Mr. Wickham's presence helped dispel the gloom at Longbourn. Darcy's mistreatment of him was openly believed, and Mr. Darcy was thought the worst of men. On the following Monday, Mrs. Bennet's brother and his wife came to spend Christmas at Longbourn. Mr. Gardiner was kind gentleman. Mrs. Gardiner was a great favorite with all her nieces. After distributing her gifts, Mrs. Gardiner asked Elizabeth privately about Jane and Bingley. "I never saw a more adoring suitor. He was totally in love with her," Elizabeth replied. "Do you think we could persuade her to return with us to London?" "A good change of scene might do her good," said her aunt. "We live in a different part of town. Our social circles are so different, it's unlikely she and Bingley would meet." The Gardiners stayed a week at Longbourn, and what with them the neighbors, the Lucases, and the officers. There were parties every day. When the party was at home, Wickham had always attended. On these occasions, Mrs. Gardiner carefully watched Elizabeth and Wickham together. Without supposing them in love, their closeness made her uneasy. Was he really good for Elizabeth, she wondered. Mrs. Gardiner decided to approach her niece the next day. "You are too sensible a girl, Lizzie, to fall in love merely because you are warned against it. So be on your guard. I have nothing to say against him," she hastened to add. "He is an interesting young man. If he had money, all would be well, but as it is, you must not let your fancy run away with you. You have sense, and we all expect you to use it." "My dear aunt, I am not in love with Mr. Wickham." "I can promise you that I won't rush into anything. I will try to do what I think is best." Elizabeth thanked her aunt for the concern, and they parted on good terms. The Gardiners left the next day with Jane in tow. Once in London, Jane wrote to Caroline Bingley, hoping they would meet. 4 weeks went by without a word. One day, Caroline paid Jane a surprise visit. "I can't stay long, Jane. Bingley does not intend to ever return to Netherfield. I know that you care for my brother, and I thought you should know the truth," Miss Bingley said, and then, without even a goodbye, she rushed off. Jane was terribly shaken. She wrote immediately to Elizabeth to tell her the sad news. This gave Elizabeth much pain. The situation with Bingley was hopeless. Poor Jane. About this time, Mrs. Gardiner paid a brief visit to Elizabeth. She reminded her niece of her warning concerning Wickham. The news Elizabeth told her pleased her aunt more than herself. The week before, Wickham wrote that he was now attached to another woman. The new lady's charms consisted of a fortune of £10,000, and Wickham was courting her with all his heart. "But Elizabeth," her aunt mused, "what sort of girl is this? I'm sorry to think Wickham so money-hungry." Elizabeth was exhausted by all the talk of romance and money and longed for a diversion. So she decided to visit her friend Charlotte and her new husband, Mr. Collins. A journey was planned. Elizabeth would accompany Sir William and his second daughter, Maria, to Hunsford, where Charlotte now lived. Although Mr. Collins was far from a favorite of Elizabeth, she was eager to see Charlotte, and a change of scenery, after all, was supposed to be a remedy for so many problems. It was with a hopeful heart that Elizabeth packed her small trunks and got ready for her new adventure. And that's the end of that chapter, and I will see you later.